Hello, everyone, and welcome to this year's eFest Careers event. I'm Tom Costabile, Executive Director and CEO of ASME. I'm pleased to see that over 3,000 students and early career engineers will be joining us from a total of 50 plus different countries. I want to extend a warm welcome to some future engineers who are joining us from Brooklyn Tech High School. We're so excited to have you all join us today in this monumental event. And go Brooklyn. As mentioned during our pre-game conversation, providing career advice and mentoring to our global community of students and early career engineers has always been a key component of our eFest program. eFest also provides other exciting content like Human-Powered Vehicle Challenge, IAM 3D, ASME Student Design, and elevator pitch competitions. We'll be hosting some webinars in the next few weeks that will dive deep into these particular competitions. Today, our focus will be eFest Careers. For over 140 years, ASME has been a professional home for engineers. Our, our virtual environment today is all about supporting you. Each of you is about to embark on an incredible career in engineering, and we're here to help you. Some of you will start companies, others will pursue advanced degrees, and many of you will go on to play critical roles in industry, academia, nonprofit, and government organizations. We've assembled an array of incredible speakers and an interactive sessions at eFest Careers to show you the different possibilities in our job hunting track. You can learn how to optimize your LinkedIn profile and to get noticed, and also learn how to brace and for your virtual interview. In our career planning track, you'll be able to get a chance to meet and ask questions of our engineers in a broad range of industries, ranging from research to autonomous vehicles. In our hot industries track, you'll hear from panelists of engineers who are working in robotics industry and the space industry. We also have an on-demand sessions in the networking rooms where you can meet other engineers from around the world. You will have an enormous amount of content, interactive sessions available to you today. So please take your time, engage yourself in as much content as you can. We hope you take away many lessons that you'll apply in your own career development. We'll begin today with a fantastic keynote. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Lisa Burton O'Toole. Dr. Burton is the president of HearstLab, vice president of HearstLab, which is a greenhouse for early stage women-led startups innovating across media, data, and technology. Dr. Burton is based in New York City, provides selected startups with investment, space, and access to abundance of resources and subject matter expertise. Dr. Burton identifies prospective startups for investment and supports portfolio companies in residence, including advising on data science and product development. She also leads innovative initiatives across Hearst in collaboration with HearstLab Scouts, a core group of women that work full-time at Hearst and donate their time to the lab. Over the course of her career, Dr. Burton has built and led data science groups at startups and across diverse industries ranging from mobile payments to advertising to healthcare. She came to data science from engineering, where she specialized in data-driven modeling and machine learning to predict motion of swimming animals. She holds a master's degree and a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT and completed her undergraduate education at Duke University, where she also majored in mechanical engineering. Dr. Burton volunteers to support women in business and STEM through Curl Code, Breakthrough Tech New York, and Girls Who Code. In addition, she mentors startup founders through the NYU Summer Launchpad. Dr. Burton is an advisory member of Duke University's Department of Mechanical Engineering and Materials Science. And following Dr. Burton's keynote today, we'll hold some questions and answers. So I can go on and on and on about Dr. Burton's career, but you know what, ladies and gentlemen? Let me introduce, it's my pleasure, Dr. Lisa Burton O'Toole. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for that great intro. All right, and just to check here, can you see my slides?
Yes, it's good.
All right, great. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be spending my Saturday morning with you. Today, I'm going to share a couple of lessons that I've learned from working with startup founders and from being a founder myself that I hope will help you guys find a job and succeed in it. So before I get into that, I'm going to briefly do a quick overview of my path, which Tom just so kindly went through as well. But all right, so who am I and why am I talking about founders? I am originally from Texas and went to Duke to study mechanical engineering. And it was really there that I learned that I loved research. So decided to go to grad school for my master's and PhD, also mechanical engineering. And I got to work on a lot of fun projects, including doing data analysis for the Boston Celtics and creating small cocktail boats, which were 3D printed and fueled by liquor that swim in your drink. I was always drawn toward the computational modeling and the data side of mechanical engineering. So by the time I graduated, I realized that data science encompassed the type of work that I love to do. So I moved to Austin, Texas to be the first data scientist at a startup. And then after building up the data science team there, I went out on my own and I founded my own company. And there we used social media data to help brands understand their customers online. We moved the company to New York and received funding from investors to grow the business. We then sold the business and I joined one of our investors, HearstLab, where I am today. Okay, now I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret. This is the quick linear version of my career that I tell most people, but it actually looks something more like this. So there was a lot that I left out in that quick version. So first of all, what I didn't mention is that before I went to college, I didn't really know what it meant to be an engineer. It was only after taking classes that I realized it was the best parts of applied math mixed with the best parts of physics. I didn't mention that I had internships throughout colleges, some that were great, some that were very boring, but what they taught me is that mechanical engineering was the right fit for me. I didn't mention that I joined ASME, and that's where I met a lot of really interesting people and eventually became the co-president of our student chapter at Duke. I also didn't mention that my master's is actually more on the ocean science part of mechanical engineering, but I didn't love that work. So I actually ended up changing advisors before my PhD. This isn't the norm, so that was a pretty challenging decision and a tough transition to make. I didn't mention that my PhD thesis is on a method to model the kinematics of swimming animals. The work with the Celtics and the cocktail boats were side projects that probably took about 5% of my time overall, but they're responsible for my earliest experiences in entrepreneurship and for some of the most important professional and personal relationships that I have. I also didn't mention that I worked at multiple startups and not all of them were successful. So if there's nothing else you get out of this talk today, I want you to hear this message. You're all on the very beginning of this journey. And remember that it's not about having the most direct path. It's about what you make at every single step. And experiences aren't binary. It's not just good or bad. There's always something to take out of every step and always somebody to meet. You'll learn something every step along the way if you're open to it. And of all the different types of people I've worked with, there's no one like startup founders that know how to make the most of every step. As I mentioned, I'm now at HearstLab, where we're focused on investing in and supporting women-led startups. I've worked with a few dozen founders by now, typically spending about a year or two working side by side with them and their teams to help their businesses grow. These are some of the smartest, scrappiest, most impressive people I know. So today I'm going to share 3 key lessons I've learned from working with those founders that I think will benefit each of you as you guys start your careers. Before I do that, I think it's important to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of a founder at a quickly growing startup. So here's an example from HearstLab. This is Liz Tsai, CEO and founder of HiOperator. HiOperator is customer service as a service. Okay, what does that mean? Think about the last emails you sent to an e-commerce brand. It was probably, hey, where's my package? Or when is this item coming back in stock? Or does this shirt come in red? HiOperator analyzes those requests, puts them through automated workflows to allow e-commerce companies to scale their customer service teams really efficiently. In the early days, HiOperator was just Liz and one other team member. Liz is the CEO, but with a small team, she was responsible for everything. So finances, legal, finding an office, hiring employees, HR, payroll, marketing, fundraising, sales. And if you think about the sales, it's really tough as a small startup without any track record to get a company to take a chance on you. She was also in charge of customer service. So whenever you get those brands to trust you and now they're your clients, how do you make sure that they stay happy so they continue to pay you? And then lastly, product, asking yourself, are you building the right technology for the problem that you're solving? If you see another opportunity, should you pivot and change what you're doing slightly, even though you've started down one path? And keep in mind as a founder that you're doing this with your runway in mind every single day. So that's the number of months or weeks or days you have left in your company, given the cash you have in the bank. And to top it all off, sometimes there's also a global pandemic and an undecided election, on top of your day-to-day stresses. So as a founder, you have no choice but to fail quickly, learn, and move forward. So this is exactly what I want to focus on today, these lessons that will map to your future careers. Liz now has over 160 employees, and the company is growing really rapidly. And by the way, Liz was a mechanical engineering undergrad. All right, that brings us to lesson 1, think like an entrepreneur. So just like Liz, a founder never stays strictly in one lane. They're constantly wearing multiple hats at once and learning on the fly out of necessity. So when I was the technical co-founder of my startup, I didn't realize that as a founder, I'd have to always be selling my business and telling the story. So whether that was to investors or to potential employees, basically to anybody who would listen. The team just isn't big enough to have your separate defined roles. And you know what? Sales and marketing is not my strong suit, but I had to figure out a way to make it work for me. What I've realized since then is that every job has a bit of customer service and marketing, if you think about it, and even if that's just internally. So for example, my first job out of school, I remember meeting with my CEO and my boss, and I was explaining this mathematical modeling that I'd been building, and I was right in the middle of a slide full of differential equations, and I was so excited to show how well this model fit the data. And then I looked at their faces and they were completely blank. I had totally missed the mark. So I stepped back and I started listening. I asked colleagues questions and I figured out, you know what, data science was completely foreign to them. I ended up teaching lunch and learns just to explain what data science was. I used a lot of analogies. I held office hours. And what happened is that people started coming to me with ideas of what we could do and how we could use data science. They were making me better at my job because I'd let them in on what data science could do. Because of this, that I could talk to customers and non-technical employees, I was more of an asset than if I had stayed strictly in my lane as a data scientist working at my computer every day. I ended up being a mini founder of sorts in the company by creating a new product that we ended up successfully selling to lots of different customers. So just like Liz at High Operator isn't just the CEO, I wasn't just the data scientist. So if you approach your career like an entrepreneur, so having that big picture in mind and talking to and learning from others, rather than just sticking to your job title, you'll make more of an impact in your role too. So this also made me realize you can have the best technical achievement in the world, but it doesn't matter if no one else understands it. And here's an example of founders in HearstLab who really excel at this. This is Raham and Column, founders of AppDeco. And AppDeco is a peer-to-peer furniture marketplace where they take care of all of the logistics. So in other words, I can buy your couch on their platform and their delivery team will pick it up and deliver it directly to me. Raham is a former software developer and is so good at always thinking through who she's talking to and why they care. So for example, when she talks to her development team, she goes the extra mile to explain why this new product feature is really important to the business. Or to the delivery drivers, she'll emphasize how important their role is and how important customer service is. They have to have really good ratings for people to trust that these others come into their house to deliver this furniture. When she's talking to the heads of furniture brands, she gets them on board not by detailing every technical feature of the platform, but by the big picture of helping them with one of their biggest pain points, which is offloading their excess inventory. When COVID-19 first hit in March, AppDeco was virtually shut down. But instead of panicking, Raham looked at her numbers, she did contingency planning, she talked to her current investors to get advice. Now, fast forward 8 months to where we are today, and their business is booming. Everyone has been stuck inside their homes, figuring out how to work from home, which often means buying a new desk, figuring out your home office. It also means that you're looking at that couch that you've always hated for years and now you're finally ready to get rid of it. So they've already exceeded their sales goals for the entire year. So there's a couple lessons here. First, get comfortable being uncomfortable. There just simply will be times when things don't go as planned. You can either spend your energy worrying or you can spend your energy coming up with a new plan. And when you're in a tough situation, entrepreneurs accept that the only option is to figure it out and that you're likely going to be pushed outside of your comfort zone in doing that. Second, communication matters. It helped Raham build a great team, land important deals with furniture brands, and gain the trust of her investors to support the business when she needed it most. If you guys add communication to your toolbox alongside all of your engineering skills, you're set. This is a great thing. People don't expect us as engineers to be awesome at customer service and marketing. And you know what? If we put a little bit of effort in, we can prove them wrong and exceed their expectations there easily. One last tip before we move to the second lesson: explaining technical ideas can get really overwhelming, especially if you're working on something really closely every day. You really care about every detail. I always visualize this series of drawings from Picasso whenever I'm thinking about how to communicate a technical idea. So you'll see that on the left here, you have really detailed drawings of bulls. As you go to the right, more and more details are being taken away until you have the simplest possible drawing, just a couple of strokes here that still get the main idea across, that this is a bull. So do this to your ideas that you're trying to communicate. You've got it on the left when you start. How much of that can you take away and really communicate the core of your idea? Once you get people bought into that, you can go back and add more of the details. All right, now to lesson 2. Be resourceful and resilient. You can't get far as a founder without being resourceful and resilient. And these two traits are also critical in getting a job. So let's start with resourceful. As you apply for your first job, it's likely a concern for many of you that you don't have experience, right? But guess what? You can actually make your own experience. My first job out of school was in online advertising, and I didn't know the first thing about advertising. So I ended up asking my aunt and uncle who own a small business if I could manage ad campaigns for them online. It took me probably a couple hours every week, and in the end, it allowed me to talk about online advertising confidently in the job interviews, and I got the job. Being resourceful also helped me find my first job. It was through my school's career center and professional organizations like ASME that I reached out to people just to ask them about their careers and how they ended up there. A lot of those people ended up giving me really good advice, but also pointing out a certain company that I should check out or an open position, maybe even at their business. And guess what? Engineers are great at being resourceful. Case in point, you're all here today taking advantage of this ASME event. That's being resourceful. When I'm hiring, that's exactly the kind of trait I look for. All right, the second part of this is resilient. As a founder, you do a lot of fundraising, asking investors for money, and sales, asking clients for money. And you hear a lot of no's. You get used to rejection pretty quickly. The best thing you can do is to not take it personally. And for most of us, the hiring process is similar. Now that I'm on the other side and often in charge of hiring, I see that there are so many factors that can be at play. The budget for the role can get cut. You could be competing with an internal hire. The role could be virtually filled before you even interview. So with each rejection, be gracious and ask them for feedback. You never know, another role could open up, and it never hurts to have made a good impression and have a better idea of what they're looking for. One of our startups in HearstLab that's a great example of being resourceful is free will. So free will allows you to create your living will online for free. So to specify where your assets will go when you pass away. This is Jenny and Patrick, the co-CEOs and founders of this business. Their clients are nonprofits. So for example, the United Way, and they send the free will platform to their donors. So as a United Way donor creates their will, they have the opportunity to leave some of their assets to United Way or another charity of their choice. Those charities now have access to data that they've never had before. Essentially, which of those donors are planning to give at the end of their life. And in return, United Way can now help honor those individuals during their lifetime. Jenny and Patrick were so resourceful in starting this business. They used a simple, free online form to test their biggest hypothesis and risk, that people were willing to create wills online. So without spending a penny, they were able to see that they had adoption through their form responses. They learned really quickly and were able to build their own platform after doing that. So again, okay, how does this relate to you? Imagine in your job, if you're this person, the one who's able to save time and money or both by being resourceful in this way. Again, that's the person I want on my team every time. The ultimate example of resilient founders are those that started businesses during recessions. So for example, Reed Hastings started Netflix in 1997 after he received a $40 late fee from Blockbuster. And the founders of Warby Parker started their business in 2010 because they believed that fashion-forward frames weren't affordable for the average person. Good founders thrive in hard times when change is really needed most. So now is the time for all of us to channel resilient founders and see the world as full of opportunities rather than roadblocks. And I'm betting that some of you guys will see ideas for a business and become founders yourself. All right, this brings us to our last lesson from founders: know the value of diverse perspectives. As engineers, we are builders, and this is a really important responsibility. In creating something, it's critical to understand the impact and the influence you can have on the world. If you have a team with diverse perspectives, you will create better products and be stronger problem solvers. And there's actually data to support this. So there's a study out of Northwestern that looked at the ability to solve a certain kind of problem. They saw that alone, people successfully solve the problem 44% of the time. If they were in like-minded groups, that went up to 55%. If they were with cognitively diverse groups, so people with different backgrounds, different education levels, races, religions, that problem-solving success rate went up to 74%. The flip side of this is that not having diverse perspectives can actually be harmful. So let's look at a couple of examples of that. We'll start off with one in facial recognition. So specifically algorithms that assign gender based on someone's photo. This is Joy Balmwini, a researcher out of MIT. She heard about these algorithms and she did what any curious engineer would do when there's a cool new technology. She tried it on herself. What she saw is that she was routinely misidentified as a male using different photos and different algorithms. So she thought, okay, is this just me or is this something that's baked into the algorithm? She took a large set of photos. Each one was labeled as male or female. She worked with a dermatologist to label them as light-skinned or dark-skinned, and she ran them through 3 major commercially available algorithms. This is what she found. So for light-skinned males, the algorithms were all over 99% accurate. For dark-skinned females, they performed much, much worse. All right, let's look at a couple of other examples. As an engineer, the work you do could mean the difference between life or death. So let's see if we can identify the common factor that leads to the 2 stats here. So number 1 on the left, women are 47% more likely to be seriously injured in a car crash. On the right, women have a 10 times higher cancer rates due to ionizing radiation compared to what standard models predict. Why do you think this is? It turns out that both of these, the auto safety test and the models, were optimized for one type of person. It's the 50th percentile man or the reference man. So you'll see that this is a pretty specific outline of who this is: a certain height, a certain weight, a certain body type. The reference man example actually goes into a specific race and lifestyle. So how does this relate to you? A couple of things. Number 1, your perspective matters. Your experiences, religion, race, gender, age, even body shape are all an asset and bring a point of view to what you create as an engineer. If you think of a use case that should be tested that no one else has mentioned, speak up. If something doesn't sit right with you as you're talking with your team, say something. Even if it seems really obvious to you, it's possible that no one else on your team has considered it. It also means if you're in a room where perspectives aren't varied, be self-aware. Advocate for hiring people with different backgrounds. Recognize that your team has blind spots. By getting a diversity of perspectives, you'll create a stronger product and will be more successful in your career. Okay, one more example that was almost harmful. So Amazon wanted to help their hiring managers by developing an algorithm to identify top candidates from resumes. They have a ton of historical data, so essentially past resumes and if that person was hired or not. They created the algorithm and saw this. The algorithm penalized words like women's and graduates of women's colleges, and they rewarded verbs like executed and captured that were more often found on male engineers' resumes. Now, thankfully, they looked at this and were looking for potential bias, so they ended up completely scrapping the project. The belief in the value of diverse perspective is core to our investment thesis at HearstLab. Our founders have actually naturally built more diverse teams. 59% of their employees are women and 48% are people of color. Diverse leaders build diverse teams build better products build better companies. And we see proof of this every single day. So as a quick recap, here are 3 lessons from founders. Number 1, think like an entrepreneur. Number 2, be resourceful and resilient. And number 3, know the value of diverse perspectives. Again, keep in mind that you're on the start of your path. That path will likely be nonlinear and curve along the way, but if you're looking for it, those bends and detours are when you'll learn the most and meet the best people. All right, thank you guys so much for your time this morning, and thanks to ASME for hosting. Tom, should we go to Q&A?
Dr. Burton, fantastic. I think I have more questions than anybody else. But it was interesting. When you started out, you mentioned something that while you were completing your bachelor's degree, you knew that you were going to go on to a master's and a PhD. For this particular group, because that's a question I get quite a lot as well. Tell them a little bit about what inspired you to go down that path that quickly.
So to be very honest with you, when I started undergrad, I thought, I hope I can pass undergrad. I hope I can get a diploma. I don't know why, but I was so scared about not even succeeding through that stage. And it really wasn't until I did an undergraduate research project and had the world's greatest advisors that I realized that I loved research. I also didn't know that as an engineering grad student, there's a fair number of fellowships available, so you can do it without getting more student debt. So once I figured that out, that it wasn't something that was going to cost me a lot more, to me it was, why not? I love being at a university. I love learning and really digging into problems. So I just went with it and was lucky enough to get a couple of fellowships and had, again, great advisors who helped me with that whole process.
Great. So we have a question here from Elisa. What do you look for while hiring students as interns in your own startups?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I think when I talked through the example with High Operator and just the mindset of a startup, startups are pretty chaotic, guys. Like there's not a very well-defined, here is your job, now go and do exactly that. So what I'm looking for with an intern is somebody who has some autonomy. So they don't necessarily need, a very specific 20 bulleted points of what they're supposed to do. They're seeing opportunity and taking it. So maybe they have a job doing simple data entry in the beginning. It's great if that person can see, it actually would be great if we added these 2 other data points as I'm doing this research. Or if they see a really interesting trend, that they're bringing that up so that they're not just strictly, doing the simple tasks that they were given, but looking for other opportunities to be really helpful.
Interesting. I would agree with you. So we have a question here from Chang, and it says, you mentioned that communication skills are important. How can we demonstrate that we have them? That's another great question.
It is a great question, Tom, and I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that one too. But it's tough because you only have a couple of touch points when you're applying for a job. So you've got communication back and forth, probably over email or LinkedIn, and then you're going to have a first interview. So if you think about this as an engineer, that's your evidence. Those are your chances to show you have good communication skills. So be thoughtful about that email. You have to think about that hiring manager is receiving a lot of messages. So you want to keep it concise, but get the right information in there. Have good spelling, punctuation, grammar, all of that. Have a friend look at it. And then with the interview, I think it's important to really do some practices, do some mock interviews, and think about what you want to get across. So again, it's not about saying every single detail like those Picasso paintings, right? But what are the one or two things that you really want to get across? And how do you get that person to understand the perspectives that you're bringing and, demonstrating the way that you would communicate in your job? Tom, what
Right.
would you say for that one?
Well, you said it earlier, Lisa, when you were giving the example of how you were presenting the technical part of a project and you saw a bunch of blank spaces. You then said you listened. And to me, that's the best part of communication is if you listen to what the other side is saying or the other part of a job interview, you learn a lot in that part, and then you can position the right level of detail. Yeah. We're engineers, as you said, so we take the data that scientists compile and we build something. If it's simple, because we're engineers, we make it more difficult. And it's that part that I fully believe listening is the best way for communicating. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. Here's a secret. I think everybody enjoys talking about themselves. So if you ask them questions, why did you end up at this company or in this role? I think it makes them realize that you are a listener and that you're interested in someone else's perspective and, not just sort of plowing through.
yeah, well, you said it again with all three of the examples that you had. The teams that started these companies were good listeners. That's how they got started.
Exactly.
So we have another great question here, and this is from Sebastian. How can data science be implemented in mechanical engineering projects and jobs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is sort of how I stumbled into data science. And I guess I did the reverse. So I was in, more strictly mechanical engineering, and I was looking specifically at how animals swim. And what I saw was an opportunity to use some of what I was using and the work with biologists. And I was really looking for an excuse to learn about machine learning and then found application in what I was doing. So essentially from very early motions of an animal, can you predict where it's going to go or what motion it's going to take next? So I would say it's helpful to have a basic understanding of what data science is and the kinds of problems you can solve. So, there's sort of a few different big models, something like regression and classification. And once you have that in the back of your mind, I think as a mechanical engineer, when you're solving other problems, you can see the opportunities to use some of these other tools.
I would agree with you. One of our biggest initiatives that we're currently looking at is digital twins, that type of modeling. And as I have to stop playing engineer and go back to actually figuring out what we're doing here, but I get too much into the weeds, and it's a subject that just is intriguing. So we have another question here. It says that you mentioned that it's important to be resourceful and resilient. Are there specific areas that we should focus on being more resilient?
I mean, I think right now we are all in a time in the year of 2020 where resiliency is key. Everyone needs to take a moment sometimes to be frustrated with how things are going or, sort of vent. But I think what's important is how quickly you're able to recoup and think, okay, all right, what's next? How do I pick myself up by the bootstraps here and continue moving forward? And, thinking about things as optimistically as you can. So, if you think about if you're in a job and you're the person that's always talking about how terrible everything is, that has an effect on the team. So if you're able to be resilient and think about, okay, all right, this didn't work. We didn't get funding for this project. What's next? And really being that problem solver, which I think is also just sort of an innate quality of an engineer too. Tom, what are your thoughts there in terms of resilience?
It's very apropos of what we're currently living through the last 8 months. Resiliency is what's got us through this pandemic. I was convinced early on, and I'm convinced today that one solution doesn't fit all. And unlike any other time in my career, the ability to be flexible, to understand what's going on, to make quick decisions, and realize that the decision I made today may last for 24 hours. It's not going to last the traditional time span. So now we're trying to figure out how to build that into a new program going forward. But the ability to quickly, and I stopped pivoting, Lisa, because I'm way too old. I'm now swiveling. So
I don't believe that.
But the ability to pivot is right along with the word resilient. It sits right there.
I didn't put this in the presentation because I tried to keep it simple, right? Take my own medicine. But whenever I was a startup founder, which was by far the hardest experience I've had in my life, there was sort of a motto that I kept in my mind, which was to stay FAR, F-A-R-R. And it was to be flexible, which you just touched on, be adaptable, be responsive, and that makes you resilient. And so the responsive piece is really being responsive rather than reactive. So, if a client called and they want to, stop their contract with you, you can be really reactive and tell the engineers to stop what they're doing and change the product to save that client. Or you can take a second and think about, okay, was that client actually not a good fit for us? Or is there something that we did wrong along the way? And maybe it is that you need to change the product, but you should be thoughtful in getting to that conclusion rather than reacting right away.
Great. So we have a question here that we're prompting, and we have more questions than we have time for, but this is a great one. That's a great segue. How important is flexibility when deciding on a career path?
Very important is the quick answer, right? So it's tough. I think probably going into undergrad is when I put so much pressure on myself to pick the right major. And I felt like once I made that decision, everything else was set. And instead, I think there are decisions you can make that still keep a lot of different options open. And engineering is one great example of that. I would say probably about half of our founders are engineers. Having an engineering skill set allows you to do so many different things. So in my mind, it doesn't close off very many paths. As an engineer, what you figure out is not only how to solve a problem, but also to look at a situation that's really complex, break it down into simpler pieces, and figure out what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And that to me is actually much harder than solving the problem. It's actually like posing that for yourself. And that's applicable to, I would say, just about any industry and any job.
Yeah, and I would tell you, that's been my career. I started out very interestingly as a mechanical engineer, nuclear power and nuclear weapons, and then went into the entertainment world. So
what did you, as I guess in high school or maybe early college, what did you think you would be doing in 20, 30 years?
Definitely being an engineer, a mechanical engineer. I was convinced then that I wanted to do that. I love solving problems and fixing things, taking it apart. And that's the advice I would add to what you just said to the younger career engineers. One of the most difficult questions I've asked myself is that if I want to change careers, what do I really want to do versus what can I do? So you look at a situation, especially in the startup world, which is very, very intriguing, the several that I did, is that I would say to myself, I could do that. But then it was like, do I really want to do that? And then research. And the difference between when I was doing these changes in my career to today, as you will know, there's a ton of valuable information on the internet that you can do your research before you get to the interview. So you know more than the interviewer. And you're shaking your head, but
yes, yeah.
Run with that theme a second.
Yeah, so, I think back to the example that I mentioned when I wanted a job as a data scientist, but didn't know the first thing about advertising. And, I'll be honest, I'm kind of naive. I wish that I had been super smart and strategic in doing this, but I sort of just stumbled into, well, I don't know about this, so how can I learn about it? But I think the same thing is true for starting a company, for learning data science, that this is the advice I give people, which is you can test it and learn about it on the side of what you're doing. You don't have to say, today I'm doing this job and then tomorrow I'm going to completely switch my career. So I would say most of our founders start their businesses while they're at another job or on nights and weekends. And it's not until they reach some sort of critical point of, okay, we have a client, or I can't go any further having two jobs, so I've got to fully dedicate my time on this. And so, there are ways to get that experience and to test other paths without just fully shifting over.
That's great. We've prompted a bunch of questions here on some practical stuff. And Peter asked a very, very interesting question. And how important is a cover letter? Is there anything we could put in a cover letter that would really get your attention?
That's a good question.
It is.
So I think a cover letter, I think resumes and cover letters, the secret that I would tell you guys there is, now that I've been on the other side, if you have a stack of resumes and cover letters, let's say you're looking for someone to fill a specific job and you've got your bullet points of how they're qualified, humans are natural pattern matchers. So if you have, proficient in MATLAB, that's one of your requirements. Make sure you use that phrase, or have the same keywords in your cover letter and your resume. So at the first glance, and sometimes it's not even the hiring manager, but someone else who's sifting through resumes, that's a really quick way to rise to the top and show like, okay, they're qualified, they need a closer look. I think the other thing a cover letter does is gives you the opportunity to show that you've done a little bit of research. So it's very easy to submit a resume, and you can submit the same, resume to multiple places, but a cover letter, you can say, I've been following this company, and I love that you guys won this award for being a great place to work. And I talked to one of your employees, and I just can really picture myself there and would love to learn from your team. Just something that makes it like, oh, wow, this person has done their research. And again, having been someone to see a lot of cover letters and resumes, that really stands out. A lot of people don't do that. So I think with a little bit of effort, you're able to. Tom,
I would agree. I would agree with you. Having read thousands of resumes in my career and taking it seriously. This is before the opportunities and before the days of actually having machine readable resume packets. Just the ability to pick up key parts. And we would intentionally put in our job descriptions keywords, and it's the keywords that I would want to hear. What was the applicant replying to? Did you read the job description? Did you do this? And then tell me in your words what was happening. I would say 80% of the time, those individuals got hired just because of the cover letter. So in my opinion, a cover letter is the introduction of yourself. That's the one time you've got that 30-second elevator pitch to tell everybody how good you are.
And it goes back to one of the earlier questions that somebody asked around communication, right? And how do you show your communication skills? So you're right, that's another, when you have so few touch points, that one it's weighted pretty heavily.
Yeah, it's the art of, as you know, it's the art of how do you prepare the correct elevator pitch? What do you want to say in the 1 minute that you have?
Yeah. And it's that going back to my Picasso drawings of the bull, right? Like, as it's your experience. So you want to tell every detail about your life, but you have to think about, okay, who am I talking to? What's the most important to them? Or maybe what are the details that I think would stick if you've got a good story or a good tie-in with the company?
So here's an interesting question. How do you get over the mental barrier that there is a lot of risk involved with a startup?
So I think there is personal risk and business risk. So, I would describe myself as a very risk averse person, which that I've had people say that doesn't match with what, you've worked at startups, you started a company. But, at the end of the day, I thought, okay, worst case, if everything fails here, I'm pretty confident that I can get another job. So, I think that there is a balance there in what you're willing to risk personally and then professionally. It's also, I think, some of the reason that there's a lot of inequity in startups and funding, because there are some people that have very easy access to angel investors and family and friend rounds. So it's much easier for them to take that on and not have a lot of personal risk. But I think there are ways, again, to start something on the side as you have your nice full-time job with benefits, where you can de-risk yourself by having some momentum and some traction, and not just starting completely from zero without any evidence that it's something that could grow to be big.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I'll tell you that the advice that I give to a lot of young startups: don't worry about the money or the funding, because that's what everybody is worried about. If I only had $10 million, I can get this to go. Well, the challenge here is you don't have any money, get it to go. So attention to detail, something you said earlier, you surround yourself with great people with great ideas and great communication skills. Smart money will find you quickly. And then the rest of it is you have to be prepared to say, okay, when somebody says, I'm going to write you a check for $500,000, I'm going to write you a check for $250,000. You have to be prepared to perform at that point. And that's where I've seen in the past, I've given a lot of coaching advice on, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this, about how do you know when you're ready?
Yeah, and just to build on something else you mentioned, oddly enough, it helps you get money if you've shown how efficient you can be with no money or little money, right? Okay. So it's actually, I think, to people's benefit to hold off as long as they can to raise, and build what you can with as little as possible. It's to your benefit. You don't give away as much as of your company either. So
Yeah, well, that's the challenge. We'll give you the $500,000, but we want 90% of your idea.
right.
So my response to that has always been, okay, give me the $500,000, I'll give you 5% of that idea. So
I'm the negotiator.
yeah. So Lisa, here's a great question. I get this a lot, just about every student event that we attend. Why did you choose mechanical engineering over all of the other subsets of engineering? And my answer has always been, it's because it's the best.
I was just thinking that. No, for me, I realized, so again, I came in very clueless about engineering. So I knew I liked math and physics. So I took a couple different engineering classes. And for me, I liked that with mechanical and civil engineering, that there was something physical, right? You were talking about a building or a bridge or an engine. Whereas electrical engineering, it was electrons, which was just harder for me. Like I can't like hold an electron in my hands and see it and understand it, which is odd because I later did acoustics and some other things that doesn't fit that, but at least initially. And then I did an internship in civil engineering, which I mentioned before. I had some great internships and some boring. And to be very honest with you, it was a really boring internship. And I think that's part of what pushed me toward mechanical engineering. I think what I came to realize, it was more the workplace and the team and those aspects. I'm sure I probably could have been happy in a civil engineering career too, but I gravitated toward the mechanical engineering classes that I took. Those were the problem sets that I wanted to work on first, and that I was really excited, and just it was very satisfying to solve a problem or learn something new in those areas.
That's great. That's great. I would agree with all of that. So here's a follow-up question. You mentioned that we should all think like entrepreneurs. Can you tell us what are the one or two keys of thinking that way?
Yeah, so I think, again, I mentioned this before, but one is thinking outside of your box, right? So if I'm a data scientist, I can work in isolation on my algorithm and not talk to the marketing team and the sales team and everybody else. Or I can talk with some of those teams, understand what their problems are, understand what their ideas are, and it's going to make me better in my role. And that's thinking like an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs have no choice but to do that. They have to talk to people. They have to understand what's going on and see that bigger picture and figure out where they're going to slot in. And they can't just strictly stay in one really defined position. They've got to, again, do the finances and legal and sales and marketing and product. You have to touch a little piece of everything. So I think that's true, though, even at a big company, that you benefit from seeing and understanding the perspectives of different people around you and how your piece and your team fits into that.
I would agree with you. I use an old expression called CEO. Some might think that's the chief executive officer. It's the chief everything officer.
Exactly. So. Yeah, it's when the companies are pitching us, they're usually 2 or 3 people, and they have titles, but it's like it almost doesn't mean anything. Everyone's doing everything, right? It's too small to really have that defined title that you're working within.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny quick story. I was interviewing a group. We were thinking of investing in their startup, and we got to it. They nailed the presentation. So we said, okay, we're ready to write a check. There was silence. So after about 30 seconds, I asked them, I said, so you didn't practice the part when we said yes? And they said, yeah.
So Tom, I have a question for you.
Sure.
When founders are pitching you, what do you look for? What are traits of founders that to you think this is someone who can build a business?
Slow, steady, and secure. It's all about the people. It's never about the money. It's about the individuals, the depth of knowledge of what they're pitching, their ability to pivot or swivel quickly in a conversation, not to be confusing. But how do you go back to being slow, steady, and sure about the concept? If they're there, 90% of the time it works. Then the rest of it, as you know, it's the challenge that you have is that the group that's there just needs to understand quickly how to put this financing part of the package together, how to put the legal agreements together, because as this begins to grow, we're thinking of an exit strategy. They're thinking about, I'm just finally can pay some bills on my side. So how do you get those two to build? For me, Lisa, it's always been about the people and the concepts behind that. One of the things I found quickly at ASME is that I have the pleasure every day of working with some of the smartest volunteers and staff that I've been in my 40+ year career. It's amazing, and every day it's a different challenge. I can't wait to get up in the morning to go to work. So it's that part of it. We have.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking. I know for myself, I've learned this over the years to be a little bit of a faster thinker in the moment, but my natural tendency is I want to think about it, right? Like I want to sit with something and strategize and problem solve. So what is your advice for engineers who, you want to show that you think quickly and can react and pivot, but you're also very analytically minded, right? And you want to sit and dissect a problem and give the best possible answer, not just the first answer.
Great question. In my experience, it's been people who respond too quickly don't really know the answer. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I need to think about that for a few minutes, because no one expects everybody to be spot on with every question. But the ability to offer an opinion quickly versus offer an opinion that comes with some knowledge-based facts towards it, you get a much better result. And especially when you look at the business world, and then that individual's, her or his ability to then attract people that support that. I've constantly surrounded myself with, and I kid around because I'm a New Yorker. Before I know what's right, I also have to know what's wrong. And you surround yourself with a very diverse group of individuals, drive for consensus. The expression I like to use most is that if I have a problem, I'm of the opinion that 15 or 16 sets of eyes looking at the problem get a much better result than one set of eyes.
Exactly. I'm totally with you.
It's been good. So we have 1 or 2 more minutes here, and there's a question here that I wanted you to respond to. I have to find it. I can't tell you how many questions we've had, and I really want to thank our audience today for your participation. Having gone through, this is a very good question. Having gone through your undergraduate, graduate, and PhD, how would you change engineering education?
So when I was an undergrad at Duke, it wasn't until maybe my junior year when you really did hands-on project building. And as a mechanical engineer, most of us want to do that right away, right? You want to build something, you want to be in the shop. And actually, since I graduated, though, I'm on the board of advisors, which just means I come and get to visit. I'm not responsible for any of these changes, but they've changed that significantly. So as a first-year freshman, you now do a cool toy design class, and you do 3D printing, and I think they do a lot of building out of like foam. So I would say with engineering to have more of those hands-on experiences early. And that's really what I think students are looking for, and also helps give you a feel for if it's a good fit for you or not. But I wish we could talk to the audience, because I'd be so curious to hear what they say too. I haven't gone through it right now.
I would agree with you. The maker spaces that today, I wish I had them when I was back in school. The engineering teams that I've led when I was either on the manufacturing floor or out in the field, the engineers that were designing stuff, the guys and gals in the office that were designing stuff, I was insistent that they went out onto the shop floor and actually built it. And the products were superior. They came quicker, they came at a higher quality, and it was one that they were ever evolving. So
yeah, it may have just been me not taking advantages of the resources at Duke and MIT, but when I first started my first job, I was pretty clueless about the business side of things. So I wish that I had understood that piece a little bit more. And maybe it's through entrepreneurship, which I know now almost every school has some sort of entrepreneurship program. So I think those opportunities are there. But again, going back to that, understanding the bigger picture. So even if you aren't the CEO or you're not making the business decisions, I think it benefits every single person in the company to understand what is the motivating factor here, what makes our product better, what do our clients care about, and then in your role, what you're building, you can do a better job at that.
You're spot on. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Lisa, thank you. This has been a very fantastic morning. The number of questions that we've had here from our audience. I want to thank the audience for doing this.
Yes.
Keep doing what you're doing, and we admire that, and we're pleased to be friends to help you along with this.
I appreciate that so much, and thank you guys so much for having me.